So welcome back. We're going to take a look at RESTNEST scenarios and triggers, but first a quick recap of what we did in our last. We added a service to the repo, which included adding this OpenAPI YAML, which we picked up from the repo on GitHub, and the dereferenced variation of that. We also updated the package.json script, which then transforms those OpenAPIs. So what we want to do typically now is would stage those changes, would go ahead and do a commit and push. And that's about all that you'd have to change in this repo, aside from running this scenario server, which we're going to do right now. There are no additional changes necessary in the repo, unless there are framework changes, of course, or you're adding new services. So let's quickly switch to our developer workspace. As you can see, it's empty, but I've prepped another workspace ahead of time to make this go a bit faster. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fork that over to our developer. And I'm going to OpenAI, and we're going to fork that to our and I'm also going to rename it so they don't get confused. And now we can take a look. These are the examples that I was talking about, and I'm going to add one of the first ones to our scenarios to get an idea of how to build work steps and scenarios in RESTNEST. To do that, let's take a look at the services collection that we have here. We mentioned it in the last segment. This is what was then generated out of our OpenAPIs. And that's what we have here. So we would also typically choose the environment that we set up in that phase. Remember, if we added that to the description, we said it was going to be prod. And so behind that, if you take a look at the environment, are going to be the URLs for that service, as well as the API keys, which are in the Google Cloud Platform Secret Manager. Of course, you can always run requests directly here. For instance, engines get, we'll go ahead and get that one, it's a simple getter, and we can call, and it automatically uses the API authorization information from OpenAI and goes and gets that relatively quickly. But RESTNEST does more than that, obviously. We take these pre-augmented requests and we copy and paste them into the scenarios folder, combine them to create rich, complex scenarios. So let's see if we can duplicate what we have in that prepped scenario. So that was here. That's completion. The first example we're going to show is a suggestion prompt. It's called Animal Superhero. It's based on an example given at OpenAI, and we're just going to duplicate this. You'll notice there's something specific about RESTNEST work steps between that what you see in the service collection and what you see here, and that's a part of the augmentation that takes place when we copy and paste those in, and I'll be demonstrating that here in a second. First, let's duplicate the structure up here in our scenarios that we're building to give that an example. And we do that simply by adding a folder and saying completions and adding another folder and saying suggestion prompts. That's basically how you lay in folders, and then we want our request. We want to get it to this format. So we're going to go down. We're going to notice when we take a look at that, every RESTNEST request has an endpoint parameter underscore endpoint, where it indicates exactly which service it is, what method, and what endpoint. We want the completions post. That's this one here. So we're going to duplicate this one, and we're going to drop that up here into ours. You'll notice now this difference between the two. Obviously the name, we're going to go ahead and change that while we're here. So now we're almost there. So now we have to show the trick to get this into an augmented form, and I'm going to do that. Let's close some of these things down here. And let's take a look at triggers. We'll get more into triggers later about triggering more scenarios, but there are some these sync Postman workspace locally are two specific triggers to RESTNEST that we use during development. There's the sync collections, which downloads from Postman over the Postman API, the collection environments, the service collection, and then it re-augments that collection and updates it and uploads it here. And you'll see that when we do this next. The quick sync is something else we use, but it just simply downloads the collection. It basically synchronizes it locally. So to re-augment, anytime you want to do that, you're going to run the sync collections. You're going to come up here and just simply say send. You're going to see those changes actually occurring in the terminal back here on the scenario server side. And when he's done, you'll see he's done because this has now been deleted because this entire collection has been replaced with a new and improved animal superhero that's now a RESTNEST work step that can switch between prep mode, which calls the local server, and the actual run mode, which calls the REST API service. So one of the first things we have to do by any work step is to tell it what type of expect code. What are we going to get back? As every service can return differently. We're going to tell it 200. If we were to look in the JSON schemas, we would have seen it there, but I know it's a 200. And we're going to take a quick look at our globals, and you'll notice this work step mode and work step sticky. These are basically the only two variables that you'll be changing while you're in development. The rest of these will change as you make calls. It's basically the metadata as well as anything related to the workflow. Anything up here in the environment is going to be related to the actual scenario itself, and this is where data actually gets collected. So we're going to make sure that we're in prep, which we are. And in prep mode, it's going to go to the local server, which we said. And so when we send that, we're going to get back a standard mock. This is from the JSON schema, and that's what it generates for us. But in our example, as you'll notice, you maybe saw it there, there was an example response on this request. And that's what we use in RESTNEST for complex data structures like arrays and objects instead of the fields that you see here. And that's what we want because we want to build up this scenario, this request, so that it has a prompt already preset. So we're going to add that up here, and I'm going to show you how that's done. We use QuickSync for that. So let's jump back to our request that we're working on. This is the response that we got back. We're going to go ahead and save that as an example, and we're going to give it a different name. We're going to give it the name down here. We're going to call it a suggestion prompt. And then we're going to take the data that we have down here and just replace it up here. It's a nice shortcut to get us to there quicker. You can do this, of course, very manually. You can give it any name you want. Once you've done that and you've saved that, you can move on to the quick sync because this change that we've made now, we've actually changed the request. We need to let the scenario server know about that change so that we can continue to build it into the request. So we're going to do that now. We're going to switch to triggers. We're going to, now this time, go to quick sync. As soon as quick sync is done, you'll see it on the indicator here. It's no longer orange. That means the server has already been restarted. And now the most current copy of this is on the scenario server. If we then run this request again, what we'll see in our environment now is a new object which we can use, and this is the suggestion prompt. This is what we would need, this variable, to add to the object mock. This is this special one down here, this object mock, which can accept variables from the environment. And now instead, we'll run that quick sync one more time. And now instead, when we run this, we're still in prep, as you can see, we get back our static. We're not quite finished though. We have something we need to add because we've added also an additional to our example down here. We've added an additional customized field that we use in the pre-request, and those we need to copy over as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and I'll be right back. So now as you see, I've added that capitalized animal to calling it kangaroo now as a customized field. I've also added to the pre-request from the prepped request, the pre-request which sets up the data, gets the request payload, this payload down here, changes it a bit, grabs the query from the capitalized animal, sets up the payload, does a validation in that process, and then sends the entire request, including that new parameter, to OpenAI. So let's do one more quick sync. Should only take a few seconds. Okay, so now we're completely up to date. Let's close everything else down. Minimize everything here a little bit. And let's run the request. We're going to see that we're in false prep, and that's our first, that's going to be from the static response. And there's our call to OpenAI with a return of choices, Super Hopper, Captain Pounce, and the Mighty Marsupial. So what you see there are basically the requests and responses that were sent back and forth. You can see those here in terms of the request body that we sent, including the dog, the kangaroo names at the end, which indicated that it wanted for a kangaroo based on the training that was done in that suggestion prompt. So that's how you set up a new work step in RESTNest. We're going to move on now to triggers. See you there.